When you think of power, you probably picture a face. A politician standing at a podium, a billionaire launching a rocket, a CEO on the cover of a magazine. We are conditioned to look for the loudest person in the room. But true power doesn't need to speak. True power doesn't need to be famous. It operates quietly, in the background, in the fine print of your 401k, in the algorithms that dictate the price of the home you can no longer afford. There is a company that manages $10 trillion. That is not a miscalculation. 10 trillion. More wealth than the GDP of every country on Earth, except the US and China. They don't make products. They don't build bridges. They just own the world you live in. And the unsettling truth is, we handed them the keys. Walk down any aisle, scroll through any screen, and you feel like you have choices. Capitalism promises competition. You pick the bank you use, the airline you fly, the pharmaceutical company that makes your medicine. But if you follow the money upward, past the subsidiaries, past the holding companies, past the board of directors, the illusion shatters. You don't have a choice, because at the top of nearly every major corporate food chain, the primary shareholder is the exact same entity, BlackRock. This isn't a shadow government. It isn't an illegal monopoly. It is a perfectly legal, mathematically optimized system of control. And that is what makes it so dangerous. Because when one entity owns a massive stake in competing airlines, they don't want brutal competition. They want stability. They want managed decline. They want a system where they win, no matter who loses. To understand how this happened, you have to understand a fundamental human flaw. We are terrified of risk. In the 1980s, Wall Street was a casino. Men making gut decisions, fueled by adrenaline and ego, trading millions based on instincts. Larry Fink hated the casino. He didn't want to gamble. He wanted to solve the math of human unpredictability. After losing $100 million on a bad prediction early in his career, Fink didn't just change his strategy. He changed his psychology. He realized that whoever could perfectly calculate risk would eventually control the entire market. So in 1988, he started BlackRock. He didn't build a trading floor. He built a machine. They called it Aladdin, the Asset Liability Debt and Derivative Investment Network. Aladdin is not just a software program. It is the central nervous system of global finance. Every day, Aladdin monitors the world. It watches interest rates in Japan. It tracks weather patterns in the Midwest. It measures political instability in Europe. It processes millions of variables to answer one simple question: what will happen next? Today, Aladdin directs the management of over $21 trillion in assets. Banks use it. Insurance companies use it. The government uses it. Imagine being the operator. You sit at a desk. You look at a screen. You adjust a portfolio parameter by 0.5% to optimize yield. It's just a keystroke. But that keystroke shifts $1 billion. And 1,000 miles away, a factory closes. Hundreds of people lose their pensions. A town quietly dies. The disconnect is absolute. You don't see the blood. You only see the data. In 2008, the global financial system collapsed. The men who ran the world realized they had built a machine they didn't understand. Toxic mortgages had poisoned the entire economy. The US government, the Federal Reserve, the most powerful institutions on Earth were entirely blind. They didn't know how to value the toxic assets. They didn't know who was bankrupt and who was solvent. So they picked up the phone. They didn't call the president. They called BlackRock, because BlackRock was the only entity that had Aladdin. They were the only ones who could see the math at the bottom of the abyss. The Federal Reserve hired BlackRock to manage the bailout. Think about the psychological implication of that moment. The government, elected by the people, had to hire a private corporation to save the economy, because the private corporation had better visibility into the system than the government itself. That was the turning point. BlackRock was no longer just a participant in the market. They had become the infrastructure. And when you are the infrastructure, you never lose. Following 2008, interest rates dropped to zero. Money became free for the institutions, but incredibly expensive for you. And BlackRock realized something chilling. Why just own companies when you can own the ground people sleep on? For generations, the psychological anchor of the middle class was the home. It was the one piece of leverage an average person had. But over the last decade, an invisible shift occurred in the housing market. Families attending open houses started noticing something strange. They were being outbid, not by a few $1,000s, by 20%. In cash, sight unseen. You can't compete with an algorithm. Institutional investors, driven by the massive capital pools managed by firms like BlackRock, began buying up single-family homes. Whole neighborhoods, quietly absorbed into massive rental portfolios. Why? Because a home is no longer a place to live. It is a yielding asset in a zero-interest environment. And the tenant, you, are just a reliable dividend. This isn't an accident. It is a system working exactly as designed. If you control the housing supply, you control the rent. If you control the rent, you control the disposable income of an entire generation. You transform a nation of owners into a nation of permanent subscribers. You will own nothing, not because of a political ideology, but because you simply lack the capital to outbid a $10 trillion machine. But owning real estate is just the physical manifestation of power. The real control happens in the boardroom. Most of BlackRock's money is in passive index funds. When you put your money into a retirement account, you are blindly buying a basket of thousands of companies. But you don't get to vote on how those companies are run. BlackRock does. They are the largest voting bloc in the corporate world. If BlackRock decides a company needs to change its environmental policy, the company changes it. If BlackRock decides a CEO needs to step down, the CEO packs their desk. They don't need to pass laws. They don't need to lobby Congress. They bypass democracy entirely. They use your money from your pension to force corporate behaviors that you may completely disagree with. It is a brilliant, terrifying closed-loop system. The working class funds the very mechanism that dictates the rules of their lives. If this were a movie, BlackRock would be the villain. But the world is much darker than fiction. BlackRock isn't evil. Evil requires emotion. Evil requires intent. BlackRock is just a machine performing its function perfectly. It is an algorithm designed to aggregate wealth, mitigate risk, and secure control. And that is what makes it so deeply unsettling. There is no secret cabal plotting in a smoky room. There is no grand conspiracy to overthrow governments. It is much worse. It is just a spreadsheet. A ledger where every human life, every home, every job is reduced to a data point. They don't want to rule the world. Ruling requires accountability. It requires answering to the public. They just want to own it. And by the time we realize the transaction is complete, there will be nothing left to buy back.